Thank you so much to all three of our panelists for those very informative and, for me, very stimulating words. We have about 20 minutes, so if you have questions or comments, I would invite you to either come, if you can, to the front here, because then you will also be recorded, if you're okay with that. We are going to be putting this up on our Law Union website, or we can also bring a mic to you. So whichever you prefer, please just raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment.
Thank you to everyone on the panel and the organizer-in-chief, Audrey. My question is whether you're looking at the provinces as well. And I use the example of Canada Pension, where our province decided they weren't going to go with the feds and create a solution to a recognized problem. So I'm wondering if there's a role here to lobby the Ministry of Labor, ask for inclusion in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and if it's denied, then to take it to the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And I guess I'm thinking to not just look federally, but what we can do provincially and municipally for this issue.
Sure. I think that's a great question. I think that right now there's sort of a prioritization of resources around what could potentially be passed in terms of criminal laws. But also there's a really healthy group forming that I think is interested in different types of lobbying and reform. So I think we'd be happy to take people's information and bring people into the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's also a really lovely idea. I think right now all the resources are going into attempting to lobby against the introduction of new legislation. And I think the new, whatever comes out in the new legislation will really shape where the work goes from there and whether or not we're in a position to start advocating around labor protections.
I'm just wondering myself if any of you all know about results out of the government consultation. I know that there was an online consultation that closed on March 17th, on Monday, and I'm not sure if any of you know. So I don't think there's been a report released on that yet.
I think it's likely there will not be a report.
Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Well, I think that the Conservatives have been very careful around using very vague language about who they're speaking to. They have had one in-person consultation that involved members of the sex work community, but they have not identified that as such, and they certainly, I think, are loath to acknowledge that they are hearing from sex workers and sex worker allies.
Any other questions or comments? Right here. Would you like to come to the front?
I can speak loud.
Maybe we can get a mic to you just for the transcriber. Okay, great.
Just want to say thank you so much for sharing your work and your thoughts on this. As public figures and like advocacy for sex workers, what is the way to get them to hear you out? Like, it's really scary that they would pass a law without even consulting sex workers, even though it is about sex workers, and it's got to be frustrating. Like, so I don't know how you would work around that.
Sympathetic media.
Terri-Jean just said sympathetic media, and you know, what I think is community building. I mean, the thing is, we have to organize regardless of what the state is going to do to us. The state's not our friend. It's not we're in an antagonistic relationship. So sex working community has always, and actually every marginalized community in these lands has found a way to work around and resist whatever fresh tragedy the state tries to impose. But I see the solution really in the solutions and sort of more local and community-based work.
And we have a question in the back.
I have a really, oh, that's loud. I have a really brief comment and then a question. So my comment is just that it's just the smallest comment, but I just wanted to make sure that it got out there in the room that I think it's really important to interrogate lawyer-client relationships, but it's also important just to make sure that we don't erase all the amazing sex working lawyers who are out there. So, and not to think that because someone is a lawyer acting as one doesn't mean that they're not also a sex worker or haven't been a sex worker. Most of the amazing sex workers I know I met in law school. So, and my question was just that I know that I think Karin, you spoke to this briefly, that the several attorneys general have made statements or sort of enacted policies about what they're going to do with charges in this strange year-long interlude that we're in. And I was wondering if you could maybe just provide a little bit more detail about where things are at.
So yeah, your question was around what we know about the laws and their operation right now?
No, sorry. What's happening? Like, my understanding was that I think New Brunswick had come out and said that they're not going to be pursuing charges. Like, what's going to be happening? What are the approaches that attorneys general or municipal police associations have said that they're going to be taking across the country? I'm just curious because I know that some people have made some statements, but I don't know much about which provinces, which cities, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, I don't know off the top of my head which ones have, but some provinces have come out and stated that they are stopping enforcement. I think Newfoundland and BC are two that I can think of off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, and I think that also is sort of the very problem is that it's unclear who gets to make decisions around that. In Ottawa, we have a police force that's very devoted to continuing to enforce the laws, whereas in New Brunswick, the conversation was at the Attorney General level, so it was the Crown that we're going to seize enforcing these laws. So it's sort of there's a real lack of transparency around how those decisions are even being made and by whom.
I think it's important to also mention that we're in an election year coming up. And I think the other governments are going to wait and see what the Conservatives do before they start reacting. And that'll also change the landscape next year.
Did everyone catch that?
I think it's important to remember that we have an election year coming up and the other governments are just standing back, waiting to see how the Conservatives react. And then we'll get more of an overview of how the country feels. But I think this is going to keep playing out for a couple of years before they really settle on a decision on a law. But I know they have to come up with something in December. And they're just shuffling their feet. I think they're in Ukraine right now.
And there was good news today around the Supreme Court appointment, so they'll be busier still.
And we have a question over here. Would you like to come to the front? That'd be great.
Yes, okay. Thank you so much for the presentation and your hard work. Really new to learning about the issue, and I was really happy to hear everyone's perspective and sort of gaining the knowledge and what we can as lawyers help the marginalized communities and sex workers. I had a question about best police practices, because you talked about the New Zealand model, but what about police and because we kind of think about it in terms of police and state as an opposition, and are there any best practices of helplines or police forces dedicated to helping sex workers that are harassed or assaulted? Are there any examples that we can look up to? That was what I was curious about, and thank you again for all the work.
most of the police in Ontario are hands off. They're not doing anything right now. And they don't want to do anything. They're on our side. I think that's the question you're asking.
I'm wondering in terms of, like, I wasn't just thinking about like, Ontario specifically, but in terms of Canada and like the different municipalities and the different police forces. Like when we look at the police and their engagement with sex workers, how helpful are they when sex workers are assaulted? Are there any helplines? Is there any dedicated police forces specifically to address sex workers' assault? And are there any practices around the world that we can look up to?
I see what you mean.
So,
Advocacy inside the police department.
yeah, you know what though? So there's a special victims unit in Toronto, which is a small office. I think they have 2 officers or something like that. That's supposed to address complaints by sex workers. But this is what's turned me into the prison abolitionist. So sounds like a fine idea, right? They're supposed to be police officers who have a higher level of understanding and respect for sex workers, understand the issues. But this is how it actually works. Unfortunately, a couple of things I'm going to name. One, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years ago, the police, first of all, the police regularly conduct raids still. So the special victims unit will disguise themselves as clients. And then multiple armed officers will show up at a worker's location and start demanding identification, do illegal searches, all the same stuff. And when I talked to a police officer about why they did this, he said, oh, well, some of the girls, they don't want to talk to us at all. But, we just need to make sure that they understand what assault is. We're there to, teach them what assault is. How do you even keep a straight face when this random dude is telling me that his job is to help a sex worker understand what assault is? Because I guess we're too stupid to figure that out ourselves. So they do that kind of stuff. They do engage with sex workers in ways that I think are harassing and undermine sex worker safety. They went even further in that one of the times they did this, they had a hotel room booked. They called sex workers in to come work, and they invited the Toronto Sun to film it. Yeah, so a sex worker walked into what she thought was going to be a job with a client, and instead it was a setup with police officers and a reporter from the Toronto Sun. So, as you can imagine, any trust that might have been there, that sex workers might have in a police officer from Toronto Police Services was eroded, if there had ever been any. And this is all happening in a context where many sex workers experience the police as a source of danger all the time because of who they are. Because they are street workers, because they're trans women, because they're trans women of color, Indigenous women, they're drug users, they're youth, they're migrants, etc. So, and those workers are not I have never heard about sex workers who have those kinds of experiences with police finding the police to be a source of genuine protection,
She
unfortunately.
also wants to know about municipally.
Well, I am talking about municipal
Yeah,
police.
that's 3
Yeah.
encompassing, just
Yeah,
policing.
yeah. And then as for best practices, I mean, within a Canadian context, the best practice I know of is really just non-enforcement of the anti-sex work laws, and following up where there is a complaint. But when there's a special office dedicated to sex workers, at least in the Toronto case, it's not working.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments? We have one in the back. There's a microphone on its way.
Hi. Oh, that is really loud. Thank you. Also, to reiterate others' thank yous. I heard today about what some police are doing in the Maritimes. In Nova Scotia in particular, they're taking phone numbers from escort ads in the local newspapers and they're texting them the signs of assault. And they're telling them to seek help and come forward and all these things. I was wondering, have you heard of that trend sort of spreading in this direction? Because I know there's been the Backpage raids, there's been the human trafficking raids in Ottawa and Toronto. Has this similar phone solicitation sort of thing been happening here as well?
No, I haven't heard of it, but it's not that different than what the police are doing with the raids, where, you know, that information, like the information's name, phone number, and location of work is being recorded. And sex workers are not happy about that. Again, it doesn't really feel like a source of support. You know, an analogy I'm going to make is, we know that there are high rates of domestic violence. If you wanted to support someone who, let's just talk about domestic violence here in Canada. If we were concerned about it, would the solution be to pose as, say, a repairman, make an appointment with someone, arrive at the house with actually 4 officers, demand to be let in, and then interrogate the person about whether they were experiencing domestic violence? Do you think that would be a useful anti-violence strategy? So the issue isn't that there's no violence or coercion or exploitation happening in sex work. There is. The issue is that the solutions we're being offered make it worse. And what you've just described is texting people, sex workers, to tell them what an assault is. That is so deeply patronizing, I just can't even.
Imagine going after regular women who have sex for free with the same enthusiasm.
We're going to need a microphone right there.
I'm wondering what the experience has been of any of you or each of you in alliances or discussions with groups representing consumers of the services that sex workers provide. And here I'm thinking in particular of the disabled community, but perhaps other groups that you may have had some contact with and built, in fact, alliances with.
Oh, I see what he's talking about. Clients. There are lots of clients with disabilities that use the services of a sex trade worker because they find her services are quite therapeutic, very valuable to their well-being. And vets, I might add, lots and lots of vets.
Have there been any alliances with, have they organized at all, or?
There's no client organizing in Canada. There's one guy, Chester Brown, who's a graphic novelist who wrote a book called, I think it was called Paying For It.
Yes.
Yeah, Paying For It. That's pretty much it. Clients are more organized in Australia, where there's an organization called Touching Base that connects the disabled community with sex workers. But there's nothing like that here. And of course, that actually happens in New South Wales, Australia, which has decriminalization, and that's why.
Any other questions, comments?
We've got one over here.
I am at work. I am Susan. So I'm thinking of 2 competing streams here. So I think talking about education and post-Bedford, and so I just want to applaud the panel. Missed part of it, trying to find the place, but caught part of it. So, but I think it's really important that these kind of forums become more common and widely publicized so that people who don't know a lot about sex work can learn more about the human aspects, and it's around organizing too. So I think that's really important around educating people who don't know a lot about this, who may believe what they've heard the state say about sex work. Which brings me to the state and the comment about the state's role in criminalizing human beings as part of its capitalist project of agenda of imprisonment and police harassment. And the decision was commented. So this government, this law and order, so-called Harper government, is 3 for 3. I mean, they've gone around the law each time. They've appealed this case, Bedford, up to the Supreme Court and lost, and so they're looking a way around this. They lost on the supervised injection site, quite clearly on that one too, and today they lost it. They didn't even follow the Constitution in appointing judges to the Supreme Court, so they're not the best. And you know, if they look at their record in the Senate and a whole bunch of other places. So I want to talk about political organizing too. So the education piece, but we really need a government that respects human beings, and a state that does not see its mission in life to criminalize and imprison people. So just want to put a couple of those pieces out there, and getting people politically active as well as community active. And so just some thoughts. I see the kind of nodding, and so just wanted to put that out there for people to consider, and remember to vote on election day. Or somebody that likes people.
Thanks so much, Susan. And by the way, Susan is going to be moderating our keynote address and panel on trans legal rights tomorrow afternoon. And I hope that we get better at advertising where this place is. We almost didn't have Chanelle or our elder arrive either. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more comments, questions at the most. We have 2. There we go. Great.
Just to add to the earlier discussion about different provinces, I believe that Alberta has actually basically instructed its crown attorneys to implement a version of the Swedish model.
It's illegal if they're doing so.
What's that?
It's illegal if they're doing so.
Well, definitely, but they issued some kind of, I read it weeks ago, some kind of instruction where they're offering their own interpretation of the Supreme Court's decision that says, so this means that we're not going to arrest sex workers, but we'll go after the clients who are exploiting them. So that's Alberta. I'll just thank the panel again for being very inspirational, very interesting. I'm an academic lawyer and teach in the area, and it's certainly given me a lot of food for thought about how to go on teaching about sex work. I wonder if I could ask a kind of academic question. I don't know if I'm opening up a can of worms that no one's interested in, or because I teach in New Brunswick, maybe everyone's talked about this in Toronto and already settled the issue. But the thing that's really struck me is, you know, feminist who's been around for decades in various parts of the women's movement is Janice Raymond is an expert witness.
I know. What?
And yeah, exactly, because when I read the Justice Hennell's judgment, I couldn't believe it. Janice Raymond, was like hit in my head, because Janice Raymond wrote, I can't remember the name of the book, the
Transsexual Empire.
Yeah. So partly I have this sort of mission because I want everyone to know that. And I'm just wondering if anyone in the panel has any comment, because you know, as an academic, I read what the prohibitionists or feminists are putting out, and they're really promoting Janice Raymond a lot, and they seem to be becoming more and more explicitly anti-trans as well all the time. So I'd love to hear if anyone else has been thinking about this at all.
So for folks who don't know, Janice Raymond is evil. Let's put that on the record. In the late 70s, in the late 70s, she wrote a hate screed called The Transsexual Empire. And the book, I couldn't even describe the devastating impact that book has had on trans women's lives in particular. And she has also advocated for eliminating medical services to trans people. sometimes successfully. And there is this bizarre, unholy alliance between people who are anti-trans, specifically trans-misogynist, and people who are anti-sex work. And so Janice Raymond and many of her ilk have moved from being professionally anti-trans to professionally anti-sex work. And she is one of them, and has been employed by the UN, and really should have no place. Like, it is completely inappropriate for her to have a public role around sex work, and for her opinions to still be considered valid. So I can't speak to that except for some of the deep problems in feminism. Feminism really, as a feminist myself, feminism struggles real hard on sex work and internalized transmisogyny, amongst other issues. But it's an ongoing mystery to me about the close relationship. If anything, though, I will say that it has built relationships and solidarity between cisgendered sex workers and trans women communities, and that's a beautiful thing.
Okay. We have one more comment. Is that still the case? There we are.
Thanks again. It was really interesting. I was just wondering if maybe you could close off by commenting on at least the small part of Bedford that I perceive to be less of a victory, which is the decision on leave to intervene. And I thought it was appalling the number of sex workers organizations that were shut out and not given the opportunity to be heard. So as we move forward post-Bedford and to try to build a system that does work and is affirming for those involved in this work, how do we make sure that doesn't happen? And also, just was it perceived within the relevant communities to be the slight that I thought it was?
Yes, it was. And, it's the problem with intervener applications before the Supreme Court is you don't get any reasons. So it's forever a question in our clients' minds as to why they were not able to be heard, although there certainly was correspondence that was provided to the court by the Attorney Generals suggesting that there was no value in some of the intervener applications, Power Maggie Stella being one of them. But I think what was of some reassurance to Power Maggie and Stella is that there was still a tremendous amount of cooperation that existed amongst various groups in crafting arguments that really could be endorsed by the larger community. So there was a lot of work that was done outside of the intervener applications that still ensured that people's perspectives were understood and shared. Okay, I think we're about done unless there's anything else. I just want to thank all three of you, Chanelle, Karin, and Terri-Jean, so much, not just for today, but for all the work that you do. I'm truly inspired and honored to have been on the panel with you, or moderating this panel with you. And I'm really grateful to all of you for coming out, and to the Law Union. Again, I hope that more people will come out tomorrow. We start early at 9 a.m. One of the panelists, Karin, I think, mentioned Naomi Sayers in her talk. She's going to be, or you mentioned her, yeah. She's going to be speaking tomorrow at 3:30 on missing and murdered Indigenous women. And for people who weren't here, we'll be posting that we have videotaped this, and you can let your friends know if they missed it, that this will go on the Law Union's website and other places too, I believe. So thanks again, everybody, for coming out.